Which brings me to the Supreme Court's hearings on Joe Biden's debt forgiveness plan, student debt forgiveness plan. This was the plan to give more than $400 billion in student loan debt to over 40 million people who have borrowed. 40 million people. And it's gotten nothing but snotty, belligerent criticism from Christians in government in this country and Christian members of the U.S. Supreme Court. And that was especially true yesterday when the justices heard oral arguments regarding a pair of cases that will decide the fate of one of Joe Biden's most important, one of his signature policies. And what the Supreme Court decides, and we're pretty sure what they're going to decide, is going to have a profound impact on the financial futures of millions of Americans who are right now young. They may still be in school. Some of them may have graduated. They're facing a mountain of debt. But the Christians don't give a shit. Why do I keep saying Christians? Because I am told 24/7, 365, anytime one of these right-wing Nazi bastards is in front of a camera and has an opportunity to state it, this is a Christian nation. Oh, you hypocritical devils. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. So, Political reported that members of the Supreme Court's neo-fascists, the Christian supermajority, quote, repeatedly questioned whether the Education Department had the legal authority it claimed to discharge federal student loan debt in order to help borrowers recover economically from the national emergency spurred by COVID-19, end quote. I mean, what a thing. What's the line? What's it from? Merchant of Venice? I don't even know. The law is a ass. The law is a ass, not an ass. The law is an ass. Whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. So these Supreme Court justices are going to, quote, little intricate corners of the U.S. Constitution. Okay, they're not intricate and they're not corners. It may be right out in front. But the U.S. Constitution also says nothing about how a society deals with something like a pandemic and the aftermath of that pandemic. And Chief Justice John Roberts, another one of these Catholic fascists, was particularly hostile to the witnesses who were arguing against stopping what Biden has begun, trying to convince the Supreme Court, let this continue, for God's sake, let it continue. But John Roberts told U.S. Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar, and it's the Solicitor General who defends the government position in cases like this. But John Roberts said, quote, well, we're talking about $500 billion and 43 million Americans, end quote. Yeah, and your point is? I wonder if the Solicitor General would have asked him, what's your point, Chief Justice? Yeah, it's $500 billion. One time. We spend half again more than that every year on weapons of death and destruction. You can't one time allow this to happen, even if it doesn't meet all the little nuts and boltsy parts of the U.S. Constitution. If that's the case, which I don't know, sitting here, I have no idea if that's the case. But that's what the Supreme Court, that's what the Catholic Supreme Court is going to say. Well, it's a violation of the Constitution. And the LA Times reports that in addition to Roberts, the other 5 Christian fascists on that Supreme Court, quote, sounded ready to rule against the Biden administration. Excuse me, the Biden administration, end quote. In a ruling against the Biden administration, they are ruling against, well, by John Roberts' own count, 43 million Americans. These 6 justices are going to say, tough shit. Go struggle. This is America. If you didn't want to be in debt, why did you borrow the money? That's sort of ass-backwards logic, illogic. For example, Brett Kavanaugh, the drunk justice, the rapist, he, according to LA Times, he expressed skepticism about authorizing President Biden to operate what Kavanaugh called a massive new program based on an interpretation of the HEROES Act of 2003, which contained a lot of this relief. That law allows the Education Department to modify or waive student aid in connection with a war or other military operation or national emergency. What the hell was COVID if not a national emergency? And why? I mean, why do they have to look at the HEROES Act? Yeah, I know, we're a nation of laws, not of men. All right, screw that. Just once. On the other hand, Justice Elena Kagan said that Congress, quote, doesn't get much clearer about the president's authority in the HEROES Act. She said, quote, we deal with congressional statutes every day that are really confusing. This one is not, end quote. And then lawyers representing the state of Nebraska, which is one of the Republican-led states that are challenging this debt forgiveness plan of Biden's, those lawyers argued that the Biden administration is using the COVID-19 pandemic, quote, as a pretext for the president to fulfill his campaign promise to forgive student loan debt. Oh, that dirty goddamn Joe Biden, huh? He made a campaign promise, and now he's trying to fulfill it. You know, Bernie Sanders has made the point, and I think Elizabeth Warren has too, especially Sanders, to charge students, young people and their families, money to educate themselves. What happens when they're educated? They don't move to China or Taiwan or Saudi Arabia or some other country to use the skills that they learn in our universities. No, that's what people who live in other countries do. They come here, get their education, and then go home to their home countries. But these are American students. These are people who ultimately have either a positive or negative effect on this goddamn filthy capitalist economy. And by positive or negative effect, I know I probably should be advocating that, what I used to advocate, in order for so much of this to change, if we could just get 10% of the population of the United States to stop whatever it's doing on a given day. Kind of a Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott on steroids. 35 million people wake up one morning. They have their signs already made the night before. And then the 35 million people walk into the streets and sidewalks and in front of businesses and government buildings in this country and sit down and say, this shit has got to stop. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy. 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.